Welcome to our third video on the DARPA Lift Challenge series. If you have not seen our two videos beforehand, then please go to the DARPA Lift Challenge website. Check out both of those videos. We're going to be talking a lot about the competition, about the rules, and not having that background might leave you a little bit lost. So this video is all about demystifying the FAA regulatory process. We've gotten a lot of emails from you guys on how we're actually going to fly legally above 55 pounds. So we have two guests today from the FAA, Brandon and Marcus, and I'll get into introductions here in a second, but really excited to have you guys, and thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us, Donna. My name is Brandon Roberts. I'm the executive director for rulemaking at the FAA. So the drone rules are part of the portfolio that I manage for regulations. And quick background on me, I was an F-15 pilot, aeronautical engineer, and then I've been doing regulations at the FAA for a little over the last decade. So excited to be here, super excited to see how the DARPA Drone Heavy Lift Challenge plays out.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, I'm Marcus Cunningham. I also at the FAA. I work in our flight standards area and in the manager of technical services in the emerging technologies division, which I'm glad I said that straight without tongue-tying it. But yeah, we deal with all the emerging new stuff kind of things. I think drones and things of that nature. Obviously, it's why we're here. I've got about 20 years in now, and about 10 years in industry before that. So yeah, I'm feeling a little old, but
awesome.
But yeah, it's all good.
Okay, so we have the guy who makes rules and then the guy who looks at new technologies that don't quite fit into those rules and help with the exemptions and things like that, right?
Sure.
Cool. All right, so Brandon, can you give us just a 30,000-foot view of what the FAA is and what they do?
Sure. So the FAA is a safety regulatory agency. Our job is to make aviation safe for the traveling public. So it's about safety rules for everything that flies, whether it's a drone, a regular airplane, helicopters, or even things like commercial space launches. We do all of those regulations, and we're focused on keeping it safe for everybody. So balancing safety with your ability to do exciting new things or what you want to do with your freedom to fly. We also care about the efficiency of what we call the National Airspace System. So we don't want to allow any operations that would disrupt things like commercial operations. We want to keep those safe and flowing efficiently so everyone gets where they need to go on time.
Okay. So from the FAA's perspective, what makes a challenge like this both exciting and unique as a regulatory case?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, it's really helpful to be able to see these types of events and see a little bit of where things are going and what things are happening in the industry. As we try to write new regulations and do different things, it's very valuable to us to see the technology and where industry is going, because it helps us write the right rules and things of that nature.
Sure. So yeah, all right.
Yeah, I was only going to add exactly what Marcus said. You know, we're actively drafting the next set of regulations that will cover things that are bigger than what fits under the Part 107 regulation. So we're really excited to see DARPA doing this heavy lift challenge because it's going to drive larger drones with more capability that'll be great for the public. Both DARPA and the Federal Aviation Administration are working toward the executive order for drone dominance here in the United States. And I think this really helps show that collaboration inside the federal government on how we're all driving toward that same goal. So I think it's great. We're really excited to support it.
Cool. So we'll jump into the specifics now. So for everyone out there, I have mentioned this before, but DARPA is actually going to submit a 44807 exemption, and that's going to be used as an umbrella for all of the competitors that have applied and registered with the DARPA Lift Challenge. And so what we're going to do actually is abide by the Part 107 rules. And the only exemption that we're asking for is Part 107 plus weight, essentially, right? So we're saying we're going to do everything, all the regulatory that is required for Part 107. And then with this umbrella exemption from that DARPA is submitting on behalf of all the teams, they'll be able to fly above the 55 pounds. So that's the general concept that we have here, and that's what we've come to after many discussions back and forth. Seems to be the most efficient. It also means that you guys as teams don't have to individually apply to the FAA. So that should be a happy bit of news for you guys. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the basics. So some of the teams are professionals. They're from organizations that make drones for a living. They've been flying under Part 107 or otherwise for forever. But others are university students or people that are in their garage who's may have never done this. So we're going to kind of go through it basic. So first, we're going to talk about how do you become a Part 107 pilot, then how do you register your aircraft, and then how are you actually going to fly, where can you fly? So we'll start with the first one. So can you explain the Part 107 and first the different classifications, the recreation and everything, and then how do you get it? How do you get a Part 107 pilot's license or a RPIC?
Sure. So first off, I guess there's to understand, especially like you said, there's some people that may have a lot of drone experience, especially privately and things of that nature. So there's a little bit of a difference if you're flying recreationally or if what you typically have done under maybe if you got a trust certificate or flying as a recreational pilot. You don't necessarily have to have the 107 pilot certificate and things of that nature. Once you get out of that purely recreational construct, which is really what we're getting into here, that's where we expect you to kind of step up to be a little bit more on the professional side, and that's where the 107 stuff comes into it. Okay. So from that, you have to actually get what we call the remote pilot certificate to be the remote pilot in command for the operation. That does entail taking a test. It's a knowledge test only. There's no physical aspect to it. And you will have to go to a testing center to actually take that test. So you go into an actual facility, you take your test and do that. As far as resources, there are plenty of resources online. You can Google them. We can't, endorse one company over another, of course. But there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of YouTube videos. There's lots of ways to prep. You can actually sit down and read the rule if you'd like. We encourage that, but it may not be the most fun. That's what we do every day. But it's go online, look at that stuff. You'll have to take your test. Once you get a test, you'll get your remote pilot certificate, little credit card like thing, and you'll be good on the pilot side of things.
Okay. So for clarification, the reason why you can't use your recreational certificate is because this challenge is for money, right? So technically you are acting as a commercial by taking part in this challenge. There's a couple of things. You got to be 16. What are some of the other ones? Some of the basics for
at least 16 years old. You have to speak and write in the English language, and you have sound mind and body, basically, right? Okay. Medically and physically capable of doing that.
And then for a foreign pilot, they would still have to get their Part 107 RPIC to fly in the United States, right? We can't use someone else's license for it.
We don't have it yet. It's not covered under like KO type rules and bilaterals and things of that nature. Okay. So, yep.
Okay, so that's hopefully that's clear. So Part 107, full commercial, website to be able to do that. There's a FAA step-by-step process. Okay, so now what about the aircraft? So they just created their own home-built, unique design for this thing. It's not in manufacturing or production for the mass public. It is, a home-built, experimental. How do they register that to make that legal to fly in the national airspace?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you just mentioned, you will have to register that aircraft. So what we do is we have a website called the FAA Drone Zone. You go in there, you just register your name, your information, put it in there. It's a pretty straightforward process. It does cost $5. They will ask for a make and model. If it's your own home built type of thing, you could put in essentially whatever you want, as long as it's yours, obviously, not some other companies. And you may or may not have a serial number depending on how that works out, or the serial number will ask for. I guess we'll get to that.
Let's jump into it right now. So, flight ID. So that's a new thing, relatively new for the U.S. and FAA. Can you explain that in probably the best way, and then we'll go back into the registration for the serial number?
So that is a relatively new regulation a couple years ago. But what that requires is you broadcasting what we call remote identification, or remote ID for short. And that's our Part 89 rule, which is complementary to 107. But what that requires is you have some sort of broadcast mechanism. Now, there's a couple of different ways to meet that requirement as set up by the rules. You can either have what we call standard remote ID, or we can have a a broadcast module. Now, standard remote ID is probably not as likely, and especially like a home built type of situation, but that's where the manufacturer essentially builds that into the hardware and the software that's actually running the drone. And then that would be, being able to broadcast either through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, per the rule, the certain information that's required under the rule.
Okay.
So if you do the standard remote ID, which is, there's a bunch of requirements, and I'd point you to the Part 89 rule where it talks about all the things you have to print transmit. The easy way, or the easier way to comply, is through what we call a broadcast module. And that's companies have built these little small boxes, usually weigh just a few ounces, that you would strap or otherwise somehow attach to your drone. And then that will broadcast all the relevant information and everything else along with that. The tie back to the serial number I mentioned was if you build standard remote ID, you have to put a serial number to your drone, and it follows a specific format, again, running out in the rule, and you would put that in your registration form.
Okay.
If you use the simpler broadcast module, they come with serial numbers, and you just use a serial number off the broadcast module as part of your registration for your drone.
Okay. So if you're building it into your system, you make up your own serial number for your aircraft. If you have the broadcast module, you'll need to buy that first and then register your drone, because in that serial number, you'll put in the broadcast module.
Correct.
Serial number. Okay. And then normally with Drone Zone, you have a drop-down menu and you can pick a bunch of aircraft that have already been sold, but these are home built. So there's a selection for that, right?
Yeah. You can just put in, fill in your own make and model.
Okay. Of course, it can't be somebody else's name, right? So
yeah.
you got to pick a unique name.
Please don't pick some other company's name for, call it that. That would be problems.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Okay. So, Brandon, we'll go back to you since you helped write the rule, or you managed the rule for Part 107. So are there design restrictions? And so here's the genesis of this is we've gotten tons of emails from people saying, hey, can I use rocket motors? Can I use this, type of fuel or whatever? Can I strap it and make it, do all sorts of weird stuff, which is great. That's what this competition is about. The fear is that Part 107 would restrict that. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. This is one of the things we're really excited about for the Heavy Lift Challenge. Part 107 is what's called a performance-based regulation, which means it's completely agnostic about the power plant and the energy source. There's no restrictions in the rule about what you can use to power your device, which is really cool. So teams that want to use electric power, electric motors, gas power, gas motors, props, rotors, any other way that you can imagine on how to power your drone, as long as you're less than 55 pounds, it's legal under Part 107. I will caveat, if you're using some sort of special hazardous material, there may be other laws or restrictions on handling that hazardous material. And obviously we want teams to be safe, but there's no prohibition in Part 107 on what sort of propulsion you can use.
That makes sense. So not that I've seen any, but if anybody's trying to go nuclear, don't please. But there's a whole nuclear, and it does not fall under the FAA. Okay, so let's move to the next step, which is how do you fly? So once you're registered and you've got your 107 license, what are the basic flight rules under 107 for pilots? And because there'll be the same rules that we fly under even with this exemption, right?
Yeah, exactly. So so one of the most basic constructs, if you will, of Part 107 is what we call the visual line of sight rule. Mm-hmm. And that is the basics that when you're operating your drone, it's generally a very manual process, and you need to be able to control your drone, and you need to be able to keep it away from everything else that you don't want the drone running into. Sure. You don't want to run into other aircraft. You don't want to run into obstacles that are on the ground or other things like that and create a ground hazard. We don't care if you crash your drone, but we care if you do some damage when you do it. So part of that, and a lot of that safety case is built off the ability that you can actually see your drone and keep it away from hazardous places and keep everything safe. So that's the kind of the basic principle, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then based off of that as well, there's other requirements of you're not allowed to operate over people. You're not allowed to operate over vehicles. And again, that's, the visual line of sight construct that helps you make sure you're complying with all those other requirements. Okay. And then if you want to fly at night, there are other requirements around lighting and things of that nature. You can fly at night, but there's extra lighting requirements for night drone if you do that too.
So that makes sense now. You can build whatever crazy design is, as long as you're, boxing your flight area so that if it crashes, it doesn't hurt or destroy anything, right? Okay.
That's the idea.
That's the idea. All right. So next, where can you legally fly? You can't just fly probably in New York City or something like that, right? But you can fly. Brandon, why don't you take this one? Where can you fly?
This is one of the other cool things about Part 107 is it really provides access to airspace across the country. So in general, as people get their remote pilot and command certificates, they'll learn about the airspace and where they can or can't fly. But the general requirements are we have classes of airspace controlled and uncontrolled. Mm-hmm. Under 107, you can fly in uncontrolled airspace. The rule is designed for that, what we call Class G airspace you can fly in. For closer to busy airports, we have higher levels of airspace classification. We use Class B and Class C airspace as well as Class D to cover towered airfields, busy commercial places where lots of, big airplanes are taking off and landing. And it's not that you can't fly there under 107. It's that you require a special authorization from the air traffic controllers in order to be there so that they can keep the entire system safe and efficient. So the way that you get that under 107 is it's a very real-time system, the same way it is for manned aircraft. When you call on the radio to ask to go somewhere with controllers, we have what's called LAANC, our low altitude authorization and notification capability. And it's again a near real-time system. You request an airspace authorization and you're able to get that through the LAANC application and fly even closer to some of the large airports in controlled airspace. They may give you different altitudes. You may have to fly lower than 400 feet as you get closer to an airport. But that's all handled through the LAANC application.
Okay. And there's other civilian apps to help you out with that too, right?
There are. So other civilian apps, there's all sorts of applications available. For home builders, they may have to look on which applications they want to kind of piecemeal together to use. The other things that you'll learn in getting the remote pilot certificate, though, is you obviously have to avoid things like temporary flight restrictions. You mentioned flying in New York City. Often there's a flight restriction over large cities, outdoor gatherings of people, things like that would prevent you from flying during those events or over crowds of people.
Okay. And so this is all predominantly for the teams to fly and test the aircraft, at their home locations or near their home locations. For the actual event, we're falling under the COA rules. We'll set up a COA, we'll have a TFR and all that sort of stuff. So it's totally different. But, okay, so here's an interesting one because we've gotten a few emails about this. What about insurance? So DARPA is not requiring insurance when you fly. And it's because we've structured it this way, right? We've structured it under the 107 rules, which means if you crash into dirt, you shouldn't need insurance. Does the FAA for a commercial 107 license, do they require insurance?
We do not. Part 107 does not have an insurance requirement, and it's for exactly that reason. We do have reporting requirements depending on if you crash, how much damage is done. If it exceeds a particular dollar value outside of the cost of the drone, it would be reportable for accident reporting purposes, but no insurance required under Part 107.
Okay. And they'll learn about how to report in the class. Right?
Exactly.
In the test. Okay. Okay, so what happens under Part 107, and then we'll talk about the exemption too, if a cop pulls up and says, "What are you doing here, Joe Blow?" What happens?
Run?
How does it work?
No, don't run. And so it's very similar. Like you get pulled over by a police officer when you're in a car. So it's license and registration. So it's the same thing. So they may ask to see your remote pilot certificate and or your registration. So you should have those readily available and be able to present those if asked.
Okay. So it sounds like this is all modeled off of like the cars and DMV. You have a license plate. In this case, you have a digital emitting license plate with the flight ID. You have a driver's license.
So for the insurance, which we're not as paid.
No insurance. Yeah, no insurance.
Don't try that in your car.
Okay, that's good. All right, so we talked about it before, about the 44807 exemption. Can you explain a little bit what that is? How does that work? And
Yeah, so the 44807 is the section of the FAA's reauthorization from 2024, and this is kind of like the geeky explanation of it that I think a lot of your competitors have already highlighted is, hey, how do we do this competition? Because 107 says we have to be less than 55 pounds. Mm-hmm. And what 44807 does is it allows the FAA administrator to issue exemptions for things like airworthiness requirements and then to provide an operating concept construct for drones to operate under. So what we've been talking about with this discussion today is using those Part 107 rules, even though they are statutorily limited to aircraft that are less than 55 pounds. A 44807 exemption allows us to apply that rule set to aircraft that don't have airworthiness. And that's the construct that we're talking with DARPA about on how to get this competition off the ground and lift things with a less than 55-pound drone so that your all-up weight exceeds what's allowable under 107.
Sure.
So that's the idea with the 44807 exemption.
Okay. So we'll talk about timeline here in a little bit, but we'll go back to the law enforcement. So now a law enforcement official sees a drone flying. It's already pretty big, abnormal, but now it's carrying 200 pounds or something of weight. Is it the same process? You show them, what is the process now with the exemption?
Yeah, same thing. Like Brandon was just mentioning, yeah, we just show them a copy of your exemption. If there was something that came into question or things of that nature, they may also want to see that for some reason. But yes, just you should have a copy of that and ready to present that if asked as well.
Okay. So the way that'll work for teams is your registration on the portal. We will add everyone who is registered for the DARPA Lift competition or the DARPA Lift challenge. We will submit that to the FAA. It'll be put in an annex. And then we will email that form out to everyone. You need to print it out. And when you go out and fly, you'll have your 107 license and the exemption with you. And that makes you 100% legal to fly an above 55-pound drone.
I'll mention one other thing, too, with the exemption, just to be careful with people, is that the exemptions typically come with a list of conditions and limitations on them. Mm-hmm. Please be sure to read that and make sure you're following all of those, because those are essentially your amended rule set for that right. particular operation. So they may add, you got to be wearing an orange shirt or something like that. No, not just, but it may have additional requirements that you have to make sure you follow. So
but we're not expecting that to be anything crazier above 107.
It should be, pretty straightforward, but do be familiar with it.
Okay. So what's the most important advice from you guys, decades of experience at the FAA? You guys have done thousands of exemptions, right? And you've seen thousands of experimental aircraft and stuff. What can you give any advice to the teams on how to do this challenge?
Well, from us, of course, the most thing that's most paramount for us, of course, is safety, right? So just be safe. If things are progressing and you're getting out there, and especially when you're pushing the envelope like this, if something starts to feel off or something feels like, that's, or, no hold my beer, events, please, things of that nature. But yeah, just the whole construct, all of our rule sets, everything is really based around the construct of trying to do things safely. So we're okay with pushing the boundaries and doing what we can as long as we're safe with that.
So in practical terms, what that means is, if you have a crazy glide ratio, good glide ratio, don't fly in a postage stamp area, right? Because if your radio goes bad or your controls or whatever, that thing can glide outside of that area. So that's what they mean by just think safe, think consciously. You're going to have new designs that no one's ever flown before, maybe. So it's on you guys to really to take a look at your surrounding area, see where people and buildings and everything is. See, how could my aircraft potentially hit that? If it can, then move it, right? Move your aircraft. Don't fly in that location. Find another way to do that. Okay, so I think that wraps us up. I think we've gone through everything. Well, one thing is timeline. So I'm going to submit here in another 2 weeks or so. How long about does it take? And then when can the competitors actually start flying above 55 pounds?
Great question. So our normal processing timeline on exemptions is in the actual regulation Part 11 that describes exemptions. We say that we process them in 120 days. We're pretty confident based on the work that DARPA's done here, the coordination that we've had inside the federal government, that we should be significantly faster than that. And it will be a little bit weird. One of the normal things that happens when we're doing an exemption, Marcus mentioned this earlier, it's kind of like a mini rulemaking specific for this event. So one of the rules that we have to follow when we're doing that to make this legal is we go into what's called an ex parte phase, where we can't communicate what we're doing with the exemption. So that's why we've focused on the pre-communication with DARPA. And then we'll enter this ex parte phase while we're processing the exemption. And then once it's final, you'll be able to give it to all of the competitors that have already registered and any new ones that register. And we'll be able to talk freely about it because, like Marcus mentioned, safety is what's most important to us. We want everyone to understand any additional conditions or limitations that we come up with above and beyond the 107 rules that might be necessary for the competition. But ultimately, we think teams that want to get a jump start, if you're operating below 55 pounds, you can do that right now. We just need you to either operate indoors to keep things safe in a drone cage, something like that, if you're going to try and lift above 55 pounds right now, and then wait for that exemption to come out probably this spring timeframe so that you've got plenty of time to practice before the actual competition this summer.
Okay. So key thing for everybody who likes to email me, I cannot talk to the FAA during this ex parte phase. So I will have no idea until it actually comes out when it comes out. But we're hoping just 3 months-ish, 4 months, somewhere around there. So like you said, you can fly under 55 pounds. So if you built an under 55-pound aircraft, you can put up to 55 pounds of weight on it to practice. And then you can also go indoors or a cage above the 55 pounds before this exemption comes. I will let everyone know the same day that I know that we've gotten this approved. And I'll shoot it out with our email blast like we've been doing. All right, to wrap up what we've talked about here. So we started out with talking about the Part 107 on how somebody gets an RPIC license. We talked about registration, the flight ID, how you would do that with the serial numbers. Talked about where you can fly. We talked about the 44807 exemption, and then where you can fly with the 44807 with law enforcement and all that sort of stuff to make sure everybody's legal. And then we wrapped it up with timeline here at the end. So I think we've covered everything. Is there anything you guys want to add to that?
Not that I can think of. Just thanks for having us.
Fly safe, and thank you again to all of the competitors who are willing to give this a try.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Thanks.